Thank you for your interest in the Bulldog Blueprint Community Engagement Program. The intent of this video is to prepare attendees of the virtual session of CES number 2 on June 9th and 10th, prior to those meetings. This information is also here as a reference for those that are attending in-person sessions and need a refresher, or anyone that cannot attend due to schedule. If you've not done so yet, I would recommend also watching the video that was prepared for CES number 1. It can also be found on the Bulldog Blueprint website. My name is Damian Schlitt with BLDD Architects and a member of the Mahomet-Seymour community. I have been and will continue to be working hand in hand with the Bulldog Blueprint Committee through our master planning program. As we promised, we've documented the results from the Session 1, Small Group Work Activities. A verbatim document records all worksheet comments as written, and the executive summary captures all the common themes that have emerged after reviewing the comments from all the groups. Both documents can be found on the Bulldog Blueprint website. A quick review shows us that, by a considerate margin, the overall condition of the middle school, with its high cost of renovation and its repair work, was cited as the #1 surprise in last session's work activity. And related to that, the #1 concern was how improvements can be paid for, something that we will be addressing in our fall sessions. Again, for more detail, look at the executive summary and other materials containing the results of our work activity from CES #1. Presenting in this video are Dr. Lindsay Hall, our Superintendent of Schools, myself, and Mr. Nathan Mills, Principal of Mahomet-Seymour Junior High School. And with that, I'll pass it on to Dr. Hall.
This graphic likely looks familiar as it was introduced in our first meeting, and it shows the overview of the master planning process that we're currently working through. As previously discussed, this master planning process is broken into 3 distinct sections. During our first community engagement meeting, we focused on where we are now. In this phase, we defined our goals and assessed our current conditions and constraints. The second phase, where we want to go, we create our vision for the future by imagining and exploring what's possible. Finally, we'll explore how do we get there. This is the third step, and we do this when we develop, evaluate, and choose our solution that is found best able to deliver the strategic objectives and vision of the district's future educational environments. This final phase will be the work we do in the fall once we return to school. Tonight's meeting is about where we want to go, where we define a vision for the future and imagine what's possible. We're going to begin to explore the basis of successful, future-focused learning environments. It begins with understanding the needed skills to be successful in our ever-changing world. Next, we will discuss programs and opportunities to best develop and refine those skills. And lastly, how can facilities support these programs to ensure students are given the best educational opportunities? With so much uncertainty relative to what our education work in our district may look like, it's really important to be active as opposed to reactive and passive to the changes and needs that are out there. As the famous architect Buckminster Fuller was quoted as saying, "The best way to predict the future is to design it." So what has changed? The best way to understand today's needs of our educational facilities is to understand the differences between how the spaces currently in use were designed and the world and outcomes that they were designed to support. We're going to explore these 3 layers of visioning, starting with the skills, then looking at programs, and ultimately discussing how programs are delivered to students. Yesterday's educational model approach was developed to support the factory model of education. Students went from room to room, very much like an assembly line, and gained the needed skills to thrive in that type of work. The goal of the outcomes was a bell curve of results, where skilled and unskilled laborers were being developed to thrive in that particular era. There would be some leaders that would find their way to the top, and then there were extra people that were considered expendable as they didn't fit into the model. This variation is very clear in comparison of jobs from then until now. In 1959, the era of when Mahomet-Seymour Junior High was built, jobs were focused in production, manufacturing, and trade. Today, these jobs have flipped with much more reliance on service and professionally oriented employment. This chart shows how things have evolved. As you can see, as manufacturing and agricultural jobs declined, they were replaced by high-skill clerical, professional, and managerial jobs. All of these things demand higher levels of education and a focus on a completely different set of skills. Another thing that has drastically changed from when our original and oldest buildings were built is the way that we communicate. We currently have 4 generations working side by side. From those that experience communication from written interaction to those that expect immediate response via a short-form text or video. It is a much different working environment, so we need to take that into consideration as we teach our students. Routine factory type of work is rapidly decreasing in our country, and things are becoming more complex. It is easy to understand that the skills needed by our students are always evolving and changing, and the spaces needed to educate our students need to evolve and change as well. The skills of teamwork, collaboration, communication, getting along with all types of people have become essential, especially as it relates to the data illustrated in this graph. While manual labor and other hands-on types of skilled positions are still vitally important to a thriving economy, those positions also require skills related to technology, communication, and teamwork. Our next slide shows this. There's a big decline in routine cognitive types of jobs. The filling and bookkeeping are done to a large extent by computers, and to a lesser extent, work is sent offshore. Big growth in tasks evolving what is called expert thinking and complex communication skills again illustrates the needs for those types of skills, which are a shift away from what we traditionally saw 50, 60, and 70 years ago. What is involved in becoming good at these skills? Students need to have more than just the opportunity to memorize facts. They have to know how to collaborate and communicate in a complex world, as well as be problem solvers. The types of programs and curriculum are also changing, from special programs to the breadth of curriculum offerings. Also, the availability and focus on STEAM, and the idea shifting from passive education where students sit and are fed information to an environment where learners are active participants, creating and directing their learning to increase their own engagement. An area where program changes and their impact on the educational facility can most easily be seen is related to curriculum. Because of the shift in the workforce, school curricula has had to adjust. In the 1960s, for example, social studies focused on Western history and U.S. history. Today, that has expanded to world history, as well as specific subjects such as sociology, psychology, and government. The changes in business education show clearly the change in technology, shifting from shorthand transcription to multimedia, video production, web design, and computer programming. One of the biggest changes in curriculum has been in the area of how we meet the needs of all of our students. Prior to the 1970s, students with special needs essentially were not served in the public school general education setting. Often, they were served in other facilities or spent all day in what we would call a self-contained classroom away from their peers. The civil rights movement, starting in the 1960s, led to major changes in public education in this area. The Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, sometimes called IDEA, was a landmark federal law passed in the mid-1970s that shifted the focus away from separation of students to inclusion of all students. As a result, almost 50 years after the passage of IDEA, we are obligated by law, and it is also simply best practice to educate students with special needs in the general education setting to the greatest extent possible with their peers from ages 3 through 21. The concept of FAPE, or FAPE, a free and appropriate public education, is the cornerstone and foundation of IDEA. We've gained a greater understanding about students at every place on their learning path, and that we must meet these students where they are at. They cannot be overlooked. Special education courses became a required offering in the mid-1970s, but our buildings weren't designed with space for them. In addition to classrooms, our students with special needs, and also those without special needs, have a multifaceted support system that includes social workers, speech-language pathologists, school psychologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, all depending on the individual's needs. And all of these people need places to meet, collaborate, and carry out their responsibilities in serving our students. What you see here on this slide is simply an example of some of what might be offered to our students with special needs. But again, the goal here is the inclusion of special needs students with their peers in the general education setting. With these changing programs in mind, they are delivered in much different ways as well. Problem solving versus memorization is no longer just a goal to learn for a test. We must be able to apply information to complex problems and projects. Technology allows for opportunities that did not exist when our buildings were built. It also removed limitations of what children and students can explore in their education. The gradual release of responsibility is the focus of providing support to students while directing them to independent learning and advocacy for themselves. Multi-tiered system of support is the best way of explaining that we are meeting kids where they are at and giving them what they need to develop the skills necessary to be successful after they finish their time with us. Multi-tiered systems of support recognizes and acknowledges that the rate of learning and how kids learn is individualized and differs from kid to kid, and that some students need more supports in place than others to navigate their learning journey with us. So now that we have learned a bit about the ever-changing environment of education, we will allow our architect, Damian Schlitt, to discuss how these impacts in the built environment in our schools can best support our introduction of skills, programs, and various delivery methods to the students of the Mahomet-Seymour schools.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. As we began gathering information and evaluating our current facilities, one very important area that we wanted to be sure we explored was from our teachers. We wanted to understand how they would describe our facilities, but also the types of activities they find most valuable in the classroom, and which of those the current facilities are best at supporting. In a lot of ways, they are the link between the skills, programs, and delivery and the building itself. In order to do this, BLDD Architects initiated a survey among the district staff. We received roughly 100 responses, and it gives a great look into our district's facilities from the viewpoint of our educators. These first few questions were open-ended and were intended to gather general descriptions of our facilities. We've created word clouds that, based on the frequency of a term, results in that word growing larger in the word cloud. Our first question: to best support teachers and students, a future-focused learning environment should feel less, you can see here, institutional, rigid, restrictive, or even hard, dark, and closed. On the flip side of that previous question, we asked, to best support teachers and students, a future-focused learning environment should feel more open, inviting, welcoming, comforting, and feel like home. A similar pair of questions, but slightly more measurable. To best support teachers and students, a future-focused learning environment should have less overcrowded spaces, cramped spaces, outdated areas. One item you'll see here, tablet arm desks. This is an important one to remember, as this relates to how we can and should furnish our spaces for future-focused learning environments. On the flip side, To best support teachers and students, a future-focused learning environment should have more space or room, technology, and it should be flexible. And in summary, to best support teachers, students in a future-focused learning environment, it should be flexible, welcoming, inviting, open, inspiring, inclusive, and bright. In addition to those descriptive questions, we also ask teachers about their spaces and the types of instruction they prefer or see as most effective. Here, we review a comparison between the dark blue bars, which ask, how effective do you find each of the following instructional methods? And the orange bar, what instructional methods does your space allow you to employ effectively? In summary, what to do versus what can you do. At the elementary schools, shown here, you can see a high level of support for one-on-one learning or differentiated learning where students are able to learn material in a variety of ways. While activities like lecture format or student presentation are less valuable to those students. However, when asked about what methods their current spaces support, you can see that the elementary schools are currently very effective at supporting lecture format, teacher-directed, and student presentations, but are not matching the expectations related to one-on-one learning, differentiated learning, collaboration, or project-based learning. At the junior and senior high levels, you can see this discrepancy is even more varied. One-on-one learning is more difficult to utilize than the other methods. Team collaboration, flexible grouping, project-based learning, and cross-curricular projects are more closely aligned to the facility, but are all not as easily employed as they should be to meet expectations of our educators and their programs. And contrary to the value that is created from it, lecture, presentation, independent research are supported by the building, far beyond their levels of effectiveness as identified by our own educators. Another key component that came out in the descriptive questions and a tenet of a future-focused learning environment relates to flexibility. This chart here, broken down by building, shows the difference between how flexible their current spaces are, the dark blue, versus how important flexibility is to an effective learning environment, orange. As you can see, all buildings have a gap between the two, but the difference is most extreme at the junior high with a slightly lesser variance at Lincoln Trail. So now that we have evaluated what is important and how it might compare to our current space, these next few questions related to solutions and getting feedback into what improvements might be most effective. What types of environmental improvements to your space would allow you to make positive changes to your instructional methods? You can see here bigger spaces, whiteboards and smart boards, which is really the ability to share, collaborate, and communicate, are key components to be able to deliver positive changes to their instructional methods. What would allow for more flexibility in your learning environments? You can see here flexible seating, which harkens back to the concerns of tablet armchairs in the earlier questions, is clearly a front runner. The next two that stand out here are bigger spaces and smaller class sizes. Throughout the survey, it was clear that teachers felt comfortable with the number of students they were serving, but the space was often the constraint. Therefore, the small class sizes item here is really an alternative solution to bigger spaces. Then lastly, how should school facilities be designed to allow for future or changing educational programs? In this question, most of the previous points all came into focus. More space, flexible seating, improved and reliable technology are what can be considered top-tier needs. Behind those are items related to future growth, but most telling, collaborative spaces and areas for blended curriculum and team spaces. So, these last priorities very well describe what we are seeing in these images. Then, where teachers are the focus of an educational space and the chairs are in rows facing forward, you can even see in the middle image students trying to engage with each other, but the space is not designed for that. Versus now, where small groups are the focus, technology is everywhere, and flexibility maximizes the usage and functionality of all spaces. Now, as a high-performing district, it likely raises the question, do school facilities even affect academic outcomes? The answer, as shown through all types of research, has shown that is a resounding yes. Some key points are that learning is no longer optional, and that we must meet the needs of every child and ensure they are all engaged everywhere. And contrary to the early 20th century, where reading, writing, and arithmetic were the 3 keys to public education, the focus shifts now to the 4 C's: collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. So we'd like to take you on a brief virtual tour of new and renovated schools in our state and across the Midwest, highlighting how schools are changing to support changes in educational delivery in the 21st century. There's a much greater awareness that the environment in our buildings can either help or hinder students as they try to learn, or teachers as they try to teach. Factors like ventilation, humidity control, temperature, acoustics, and natural daylight have all been shown to correlate to changes in student and teacher outcomes. So new buildings have a renewed emphasis on creating healthy environments. This even extends to the realm of food service, the scheduling of that time, and the menu being offered. New schools use natural daylight to supplement artificial lighting to provide superior lighting. New light fixtures can be on daylight sensors so that when natural daylight is sufficient, the artificial lighting can be turned off, and we can harvest free daylight, which studies have shown significantly improves productivity. In areas where daylighting is not sufficient to cover all lighting needs, artificial fixtures are extremely important to create proper working conditions, but also have a strong impact on the overall learning environment. There is a great awareness in our society that schools need to be safe and secure. We not only need to provide access control, but we also need to incorporate provisions for observation, visual control, and to create an environment where students feel safe to pursue their studies. Technology is no longer an add-on, but must be truly infused into an educational facility, where its use and access are designed into the functionality of the facility and for its users. Spaces must be engaging. By creating an environment with beautiful aesthetics and inviting exteriors, school pride is on display, and color palettes are appropriate for grade levels, ultimately making a school where students want to be. 21st century schools have to be fluid and flexible, to be able to nimbly respond to the changing educational approaches desired by educators. This relates to seating, storage, and other furnishings. But also it must provide multi-use space that can be easily reconfigured to allow support of a variety of educational activities today and moving into the future. In response to educators' belief that students learn in different ways, buildings are evolving to become more student-centered, allowing the student to be more active participant in their education and to shape the learning environment to meet their individual learning needs. The author Daniel Pink notes that in an age of abundance, it's the creators and the innovators that will create value. School facilities are putting an increasing premium on spaces that foster creativity, like the spaces that artists and architects are even trained in. And finally, we know that students learn from one another in powerful ways, and the importance of learning in social context. School facilities are responding by creating spaces where students can collaborate easily, through open, larger group areas to more isolated, small group areas. Now that we've talked about some examples of buildings, I would now like to pass this back to Dr. Hall and Mr. Mills to wrap up our informational presentation and outline some of the variations among education from K through 12.
A junior high versus the middle school. A junior high can be defined as a scaled down version of a traditional high school schedule. It may have a 10-period day, teachers are very departmentalized, and it is very subject oriented. Whereas a middle school is very student focused, there are grade level teams, daily collaboration amongst the staff on those teams, and this concept allows for a more gradual and appropriate transition for students to high school. Even though we are called Mahomet-Seymour Junior High, we have followed the middle school concept since the 2014-15 school year. Our building is in a unique situation that we receive students who are still in the elementary level developmentally and leave our building ready to go to high school. Developmentally, the middle school is more fitting for student needs. There is a big difference between 6th and 8th graders. As far as teams go, we have an orange team and a blue team per grade level. The orange team is approximately 2/3 of the students, and the blue team is approximately 1/3 of the students. The breakdown is purely for student numbers. Students on each team have the exact same opportunities. As far as teachers go, teachers on the orange team include 2 math teachers, 2 English teachers, a science teacher, and a history teacher. And then on the blue team, there is 1 English teacher, 1 math teacher, and 1 teacher who teaches both science and history. Current challenges versus future needs at Mahomet-Seymour Junior High. We currently have many challenges at Mahomet-Seymour Junior High, but I'm going to highlight a few of those. The lack of collaboration space is a main issue here at the junior high and a challenge. If 2 or 3 students want to get together to collaborate and work on a project, oftentimes this can only be done in the hallway on the floor. If it's classes that are wanting to get together to work on a project, the only 2 spaces in the building that allow for this would be in the library and media center or the cafeteria. This entails working around the schedules because both spaces have classes visit or are utilized as a classroom throughout the entire school day. So this is very limited for students and classes to get together in a big setting. We just don't have that space currently. The lack of restrooms here at Mahomet-Seymour Junior High. We have 3 sets of student restrooms. 1 is located in the 6th grade hallway, 1 in the 8th grade, and then 1 down by the gym in the elective space. So 7th grade students have to go through a space that is not their area in order to use a restroom. Building layout is very disruptive when students go to electives and or lunch. So if you think of the junior high as a rectangle, the top being the 8th grade hallway, the bottom being the 6th grade hallway, one end being the 7th grade hallway, and the other end being the elective space. When 7th grade students head to lunch, they have to walk through the 6th grade space or the 8th grade space. And as much as we ask them to remain quiet, when 250 kids are walking to lunch or walking back to the classroom from lunch, it can be very difficult and very disruptive for the 6th and 8th grade students who are in class. Although we envision many future needs, I think some of the highlighted areas need to be mentioned would be a flexible collaboration space. Our staff is collaborating on a daily basis within the middle school concept, and it is very difficult for our students to do that with other students or classes with other classes. We envision grade level wings where each grade level would have their restroom. Students will not have to travel far in order to use that space. Proper media center, elective classrooms, and cafeteria space would act as the hub, the middle of the school. So 6th grade students wouldn't have to travel through a different grade level space just to get to their electives or just to get to lunch. And that goes for all grade levels. 8th graders would be in the 8th grade area. The different grade levels would not intermingle or intermix. Again, we have many challenges and we envision, many things that we need in order to serve our students the best possible way that we can.
Thank you again for your time and interest. We look forward to seeing you after our break. When we start meeting again, we'll need your help in making sure as many people as possible attend our upcoming sessions. So please, help us spread the word, and we hope to see each and every one of you next fall. Please visit www.bulldogblueprint.com for future RSVPing, as well as for information related to the program. Be safe, have a great break, and thank you for coming. We'll see you next school year.